I notice a lot of you have asked for another collaboration with Fear Urmaker, and it just so happens we actually did a collaboration a couple months ago that we just never made public. Now that he's reached over 30,000 subscribers, I thought we'd make this public. I have to give him a big thank you for being very patient with me, and without any further ado, let's begin. When I was 16, I lived with my mother in a busy metropolis suburb of a major U.S. city on the East Coast. My mom and dad were separated, and my younger brother lived with my dad a few miles away. I attended a high school about half an hour away because they had a program for students with learning disabilities. This meant that I had to wake up super early in the morning during the school year to make it to the bus stop on time. The bus stop was at an elementary school behind our townhouse development, with a yard that sloped steeply on the side of our neighborhood. The walk to my bus stop was just long enough to be a pain in the ass when I was walking home in the afternoons after school and I just wanted to get home. But in the mornings, my mother usually insisted on driving me there, because during the winter it was dark and the neighborhood we lived in wasn't very safe. Like I said, it was a busy suburb. The sound of emergency vehicle sirens or helicopters flying wasn't unusual, and were daily reminders that crime wasn't far away from us. The neighborhood we lived in was not only near an elementary school, but was also directly across the street to two back-to-back shopping centers and a very large mall. As convenient as it was, there was times when this was very dangerous. One time, I was hanging out at our neighborhood playground listening to music when I saw a teenage boy run past me hanging onto something large and heavy in his pocket. Not 2 minutes later, at least 5 cops followed him, one stopping and asking me where he went. After pointing in the general direction I'd seen him go, I quickly hightailed it back to my house. In another case, I had woken up to popping sounds in the house directly across from ours one early Saturday morning. Not long after that, at least 6 cop cars came barreling down the street, blocking it off on both sides. I later found out that it had been a domestic dispute that had ended in a shooting. However, the most memorable incident was on a Friday evening. I'd been at a school play with some friends when my mother had her friend, Barbara, come over to visit. They'd been outside on our balcony, smoking and talking, when they noticed a middle-aged woman walking down the street, appearing to just be out for a stroll. A few minutes later, they noticed a man following the woman down the street. She seemed to be completely oblivious to the fact that he was following her. It made them both suspicious, but because they'd seen nothing but 2 people walk down the street, there was nothing they could do. Sadly, a day or 2 later, they saw a newspaper article with both of the men's pictures and the woman they'd seen that night. It turns out the woman had just moved into a townhouse not 2 streets away from our house, and had indeed been out for a stroll that night. The men they saw following her had tracked her back to her house, broke in, and brutally raped her and stabbed her to death. Yeah, it was that kind of neighborhood. And unfortunately, it didn't end there. It was one weekday night at dusk, when I was in my bedroom listening to music, and just generally being in my own little world. My mom usually complained that I never noticed the outside world around me, but that night, I heard the sound of a helicopter flying overhead. I tried to tune it out, but it got louder and more persistent. I peeked out the window of my 3rd-story bedroom to check it out. The helicopter was flying low enough that I could see 2 people in it, and circled the area close enough that I never lost sound of it. Concerned, I called my mother at her work at a car dealership about 20 minutes away, and quickly let her know what I saw. She told me that she would find out what was going on and would call me back. A few minutes later, she calls me and tells me in a panicked tone that a robbery at one of the shopping centers ended with a police standoff. The robbers shot a car before fleeing into the surrounding neighborhoods. The helicopter was a part of the manhunt searching for the shooter. My mother told me to make sure all the doors and windows were locked and to stay in until she got home from work. I did what she asked, completely scared shitless, vivid images of break-ins and hostage situations flashing through my mind. There was literally nothing I could do to help me relax. It got even worse when my mother's usual time to be home came and went. An hour and a half after she's usually home, I was completely panicked. This was the age before cell phones, and it was way past the time when her work would be closed. When I finally heard her Jeep in the driveway, I almost jumped out of my skin before racing down our stairs in our house to unlock the door and let her in. My mother fairly flew through the door before slamming it and locking it behind her, breathlessly telling me why she'd been late for work. Besides the usual traffic, when she turned onto a street to get home, she discovered that the police had barricaded all entrance into and out of the neighborhood and weren't letting anyone in or out. My mother frantically tried to explain to the cop that her 16-year-old daughter was at home alone, but he still refused to let her pass. Being the strong-tempered, red-headed Irish woman she is, my mother promptly reversed her Jeep and drove over the sidewalk into the steep sloping yard of the elementary school in order to get home. We ended up holing up in my mother's room on the second floor that night, with a chair jammed up against the doorknob for added protection. Right before attempting to get some sleep that night, my mother informed me that I wouldn't be taking the school bus the next day, as she would be driving me to school. I myself made sure to set the alarm in her room to wake us up in the morning, so that I could at least make it to school on time. Unfortunately, despite this, we both overslept a good half hour past the time the classes started. I took my time getting ready, as I figured I was already late and I had an ironclad excuse for being so. My mother turned on the morning news, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Apparently, the manhunt siege lasted all night, and earlier that morning, the cops tracked him down into a stolen car and a high-speed chase ensued. That chase happened to take place at the exact same time that my mother and I would have been driving to my school, and happened to go down the highway interconnector that was the straightest, most direct route to my high school. The robber-turned-cop killer had hit another car in his haste to get away, and the car had been flipped over on the pavement, instantly killing the driver. It was then that I realized, sometimes it pays to be late. Sometimes it just may save your life. A few months ago, before I wrecked my first car, I was leaving work. It was a little after 2 a.m., and we had just finished closing the restaurant. There's a motel connecting to the restaurant, and incredibly weird and shady people stay there, the kind you don't want to talk to past sunset. I was walking out to my car with other people on my shift, when a guy walked out of the motel. He didn't get close to me, as my coworker was between us, but he was staring at me with this blank stare. My coworker told him to go somewhere else because we were closed, but he kept staring at me, or my car. I drove a very pretty Monte Carlo SS, and I thought he was just admiring it, until he looked at me, and in this cold monotone voice he said, "You're not safe in that car. Watch out. Something will happen to you in that car." This freaked me out, and my coworker again told him to go somewhere else, and he did. She offered to follow me home since she knows I get very anxious and very paranoid, to which I happily agreed, and the ride home went well. The next week I was leaving school, and when I went to turn to go home, I was hit. I swear the guy who hit me came out of nowhere. I didn't see him when I started turning, but I was still at fault. He hit me and then hung to my car, dragging it 50 feet in the other direction. My car was totaled. I was standing there crying while the cops were running my license plate and registration, and waiting for my dad. When I looked over, I saw some cars passing by, and they were kids I knew, which was embarrassing. But then I saw another car coming, very slowly. The car slowed down even more when they got close to my side of the wreck. The window rolled down, and they slowly drove over my busted headlights on the ground. It was the same man from that night my coworker followed me home, giving me that same blank stare. As he drove by, he said, "I told you." Whether it was a lucky guess, or a feeling he had, I have no idea. Since then I've gotten another car, and I've been extremely cautious with everything I do in it, and I haven't seen that man since. Some of you from Australia might know that the Australian government does not readily supply information about sex offenders in the public. This should probably change for the safety of the public. At the time of this, I was around 9, so in the 4th grade at primary school. At the end of the school day, all the students would leave either through the front or the back entrance of the school. I left through the front entrance, which had a stretch of road passing by. This means, to get on my way home, I would have to cross this road. There was always a staff member holding a sign to help students cross the road, so you would think under those circumstances a child would be quite safe. The morning before this incident, my parents told me I was to walk home, which was only a few minutes' walk. Try not to blame my parents for this. It's quite common to see children around these areas walking home, and my parents had, and still do have, probably too much trust in me. After an average day at school, I made my way down to the front entrance to leave and head home. I was about 3 meters away from the zebra crossing attended by a staff when a dirty beat-up pickup truck drove right in front of me, and a dirty man, presumably in his late 50s or 60s, rolled down his window. This man looked like he had been homeless for years, with teeth that swayed all around his grimy-looking mouth. His hair was brown and matted, and he was dressed very poorly in a stained white t-shirt and jeans. This man looked out of his window straight at me and said the classic pedophile line, "Hey kid, I have some candy. Come over here and get in my car." Luckily, my parents drilled me very heavily on staying away from strangers. I stared at the man for a few seconds and made my way back through the front entrance into the school. Unfortunately, I didn't tell anyone immediately after the incident. Over the next few days, the school had been experiencing similar occurrences out in front of the entrance. This all boiled over at one point when the man attempted to break into the school, and the school was forced into an emergency lockdown. I don't know if the police caught the man during or after the break-in, but they did catch him. The reason why this experience chills me to the very bone is that this was in an everyday Sydney suburb with many children and adults nearby. I have never been able to find information about the man or many other criminals in my area, including a rapist in the local park. Unfortunately, these things are often not reported on and get no media coverage. My advice is, educate your children thoroughly on the dangers of a situation so that they can protect themselves adequately. You never know when something like this can happen, even in the most normal and crowded areas, where you'd assume your child would be safe. I'm a 16-year-old female, and just this past year I went to my first party. I didn't even really want to go, since I'm more of an introverted type of girl, but my friend convinced me to go and assured me that it wouldn't be so bad, and if I didn't have fun, he would take me home. It was around 12 a.m. when we first got to this place, and I saw that it was not only kids my age, but it was also older adults, predominantly in their 20s. I immediately wanted to go home because they were rather tough looking, and I didn't want to be a part of anything bad. When I asked my friend to leave, he said that I needed a drink, but again, I didn't want to do any of that. I just wanted to get the fuck out of there. One of the men, who was all in black, about 6'4", had his dark brown eyes on me. He looked really rough, and he had tattoos all over his body. He also had this really nasty scar on his face, which I can only assume was caused by a knife. He smiled at me, and he had a crooked smile, with some of his teeth missing from his mouth. I tugged on my friend's arm, but he only swatted my hand away, and then mingled with other people in the place. The way the man was watching me made me shiver. I knew I needed to go. I finally decided I would do it myself, so I pushed past some people and exited the party hall. Once I was outside, I saw the man from before only a few feet behind me. I couldn't really see his face because it was dark, and he had his hood up by this point. When I started to look in my pocket for my phone, I realized that I left it at home because I didn't want to lose it. I cursed myself and began to move a little quicker, and he sped up too. Then I went into a full-on sprint, and he matched my speed, now only a foot behind me. I felt him grab my hand, but at this point we were at streetlights and a car was coming down the road. The man looked at me, then back to the car. It looked like he was deciding if it was worth it. As soon as he made his decision, he pushed me into the road and ran away from me quickly. The car stopped a few feet away from me, and the woman asked if I was alright. At this point, I just wanted to get home, and I knew I shouldn't go with a stranger, but I asked her to take me home, and she kindly accepted. On the way home, she told me about her children, and said that my mother was probably worried sick. I kept quiet the whole ride. I just wanted to be in bed. Once I got to my house, I ran up my stairs and laid in my bed wondering what the guy wanted with me. I fell asleep a few hours later and was woken up by my phone buzzing. It was my friend from last night asking what happened, and I just kind of blew him off. I was pissed at him. After what felt like 5 minutes went past, my phone vibrated again, but this time it was a Facebook message. A name went across my screen that said, Angel Jackson. A fake name, I knew that much. I opened the message and it read, "Hello, Stephanie. Too bad you didn't stick around last night. I could have had tons of fun with you." My heart sank into my stomach. How did this fucker know my name? Who told this twisted fuck who I was? My mother wasn't home, and I didn't live with my monster of a father, and my sister was at college while my brother was at my grandma's, where I would have been if I didn't want to be home alone for a party. I didn't know what to do, call the police, or tell a friend. So, I just called my guy friend who took me to the party and I told him everything. He seemed to know who this guy was, and my heart dropped from my stomach to my feet when he said, "Steph, you need to get out of that house. Just go to the neighbors or something." Apparently this guy had a record of assaulting/stalking young women. My heart was pounding and I started to pack my bag, quickly scanning the room for things that I may need for the night. I figured I would take my friend's advice and stay with my neighbor for the night. When I got down to the bottom of my steps, I saw a black car going past my house really slow. They must have seen me, because they stopped right in front of my driveway and backed into it. My heart was flying at this point, and when the driver got out, I saw it was the creep from the night before. Through the window of the front door, I noticed he had something sharp in his left hand, and what looked like rope over his right shoulder. I started to feel tears rolling down my cheeks when I finally grabbed my phone out of my pocket and called the police. The man started laughing hysterically as he reached for the front door. Then he started to slam himself against the door. The lady who stayed on the phone with me told me to go into the bathroom and lock myself inside. I did as I was told, and I also hid in the shower. I heard him stomping around after a while, and with every step he took, my heart sped up a little more. I heard him just outside of my bathroom when the police rolled up in front of my house. They ran through the busted front door and removed the man. A female officer found me, wrapped me in a blanket, and then walked me out. Once we were out there, the man shot me one last wicked smile as they put him into the police car. It's been about 4 months now, and everything seems to be settled. I haven't been to any parties since, and my mother keeps a close eye on me now. I learned my lesson, and then some. I am a retired police officer. From where is not important, as I still have people in my area who remember me, and I would rather they didn't. I worked for a rather small department, and I found myself out on patrol alone more than once a week. This particular night I was doing a rec check over a mountain pass. A rec check means that you're just driving along the pass a few times to check for car accidents and drunk drivers. This area is not populated, and if I get into trouble out there, backup was at least an hour away. Almost to the top of the pass, I came upon a car that was driving very slow, and was also having trouble staying within the lines. I decided to pull the vehicle over at the next chain-up area. I contacted the driver, who was approximately 60 years old, and he looked like he had not had a bath in at least 5 years, and smelled like it as well. The aroma from the inside of the car was disturbing. I engaged the driver in small talk while he collected all his information for me, when I noticed a very long knife blade sticking out from under the passenger seat. I asked him to get out of the vehicle so that I could administer a sobriety test, and I wanted to get him away from that big-ass knife. He was clearly not impaired, so I asked him about the knife and asked him if I could take it out of the vehicle. He said sure, and let me open the passenger's door and pick up this deadly-looking weapon. It was clearly handmade, very rough-looking, and the handle was made out of wood, leather, and $1 silver was used for the guard. I guessed that the length of the blade was 18 inches long. I asked him why he would have such a wicked weapon like this in his car, and if he knew it was not legal to do so. Now here's where it got really creepy, and it truly scared the living shit out of me. With a straight and truthful face, he said to me, "Oh, that is my vampire killer." With that, I asked in a pitiful voice, "Why would you need to kill vampires?" As soon as this foolish statement left my lips, I knew just how frightening this whole exchange was getting. He told me that he made the knife himself, and said that the silver dollar was there in case there was some truth that silver could hurt a vampire. He also told me that he had killed several vampires with this knife, and that being a vampire hunter was his job, and that he does this as a service to all of us humans. Now, I have dealt with liars and scammers, and there was something in the way that this man talked that made me know that he believed everything that he was saying to me. I could feel all of the blood run out of my face as he told me this story. I wasn't sure what to do at this point. I couldn't arrest him because I really didn't know if he killed anyone, and I had no evidence of a crime either. I did confiscate the knife, and I let him go, but not without getting as much information as I could. I had the knife tested for blood, but none was found on it. I really think he was insane, and being alone in the dark on an empty, lonely highway was not where I wanted to be at that moment. I've been in some situations I didn't think I was going to live through before, but even those didn't scare me as much as this man did. I'm 15 years old, and I have a learner's permit for driving. In North Carolina, you have time restrictions for driving until 6 months after you have gotten your permit, given that you haven't had any driving infractions. Also, you have to keep a log of how long you've driven, which requires you to have logged in a certain amount of daytime and nighttime driving hours in order to obtain a license after 1 year of holding a permit. It had just reached the date where I had my learner's permit for 6 months, and I could finally start logging some nighttime hours. My grandfather agreed to accompany me on some driving after he had picked me up from the skating rink, which is where most of my friends hang out. It is a requirement to have an adult with you when driving with a permit. By the time we leave the rink, it's really dark outside. I decided to go driving on some back roads around the Chimney Rock area, and I came to a gravel roadway up in the hills. I knew this road well, and there wasn't much on it. Maybe 1 or 2 entrances to long driveways, and that was it. And at the end of the gravel road is connected to another main road. Knowing the area very well made me confident, despite being a novice driver. I started down the gravel road, keeping my speed down because the road was rather narrow, and I was worried about cars coming the other way. By this point I was getting rather bored and tired, and right as I went around a corner, I saw trash bags slung all over the road, blocking my path. My grandfather was staring off into the darkness until I asked him what to do. He looked shocked before yelling, "Just go! Hurry up!" I asked him why, but he just continued yelling. Following his directions, I gunned it over the trash bags. We were in a mid-sized SUV, so we got over them fairly easy. I slowed down as my grandfather started yelling again. I continued down the gravel roadway faster than I should have, my heart racing. Once we finally reached the main road, I turned onto it. That's when I took the opportunity to ask my grandfather why he was freaking out back there. He said that he had seen a few people ducking down in the thick growth by the road. I didn't notice this. Thank God he was so observant. The reason this is so frightening is because this is a new technique to get people out of their vehicles at night. Block the road with trash, and once they get out to fix it, you can rob them. To this day, I thank God that my grandfather was with me and that he was so observant. It has been a few months since this has happened, and I'm still too scared to go out that way again. The following story happened to me in 2006. To clarify, I'm a female, and I was 23 when this happened. My husband was in the Army, and we were living on post where he was stationed. It was the 4th of July, and we were back in our home state visiting our families. My grandmother lives way out in the country, and the only way to get to her house is driving along very narrow and curvy roads. Though I have been driven on these very same roads so many times as a child, I always felt a bit uneasy. This day happened to be no different. My daughter, who was 2 at the time, was fast asleep in the back seat, and my husband was driving. We were about 30 minutes into the drive when I glanced over to the driver's side window. We were passing a gas station that I knew put us about 45 minutes or so away from my grandmother's house. I went back to looking out my window when, I shit you not, I heard a faint whisper in my right ear. "Keep your legs up." I have no idea why, but I instantly pulled my legs up into my seat. It took me a moment to realize what I was doing. I looked around and just shook it off, believing it was my imagination running away with me. So I put my legs back down and went back to gazing out the window. I heard the same whisper. "Keep your legs up." Again, without thinking, I pulled my legs up into my seat. I looked around the van. My daughter was fast asleep, and my husband was concentrating on the road. I started to wonder if the sound of the engine was somehow getting to me, so once again I went back to looking out the window. My eyes, taking note of a large barn that sat in an open field surrounded by barbed wire fence, told me that it wouldn't be much longer now. Another whisper. "Keep your legs up." This time I noticed it was a little louder and sounded rather urgent. "Hey, did you say something to me?" I asked my husband as I looked at him. He glanced over at me and shook his head. "No, I didn't. Why?" "I swore I heard you say something." "Nope, wasn't me." I sat there, puzzled by the whispering. What did it mean? That's when I heard it for the final time. "Keep your legs up." This time when I pulled my legs up into my seat, I suddenly felt like I should brace myself for impact. What happened next felt like it was all in slow motion. My husband saw a car swerving back and forth in the road in the oncoming lane, and he knew he had a decision to make, fast. Have a head-on collision, or take his chances in the ditch. He picked the ditch. We became airborne for about 5 seconds before landing into the ditch. The front of our van came crashing into a tree at about 55 miles per hour. I was knocked out for a bit. I'm not really sure how long, but my daughter's terrified scream slowly brought me back into reality. The next thing I heard was my husband's voice asking if I was alright, which I was, thankfully, aside from my legs hurting really bad. I tried to put them back down onto the floor, but I realized I couldn't for some reason. When my vision came back, I looked down and I gasped. Due to the impact the front of the van took, the entire floorboard had been pushed up so far it was literally touching the bottom part of the seat itself. With my husband's help, I managed to get out of the van safely. 2 other people who had witnessed the accident called 911. It turns out that aside from my husband having to get some stitches in his right knee, we were alright. The doctor told me if I had actually kept my legs down, I would have most likely lost them, and my unborn son. I didn't even know I was pregnant at the time. I don't know what it was that kept warning me to keep my legs up, and to this day I still don't like long, narrow country roads, and I always ask my husband to avoid them as much as possible. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you left a like, shared it with your friends, and subscribed for future content. And if you would like to hear even more scary stories, make sure you head over to Fear Urmaker's channel for another collaboration video we worked on together. I hope you all had a fun and safe weekend, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true.